This video is brought to you by NCIX.com. Great technology, selection, and service.
When building a silent system, we often prioritize on the enclosure to block out the noise of the hardware. And yes, the case is an important part of this unique, quiet equation, but it's the system itself that also must be used with appropriate components for completely satisfactory acoustic results. So here we have the Silent Bass 600 mid-tower from Be Quiet, priced at $119 for the windowed version and $10 less for the solid side panel. This thing is competing directly with the Define R5. And I'm curious to see if the Silent Bass 600 will yield satisfactory building experience, since the interior frame is based off the Silent Bass 800, its bigger brother, which I remember to have some problems. Starting with the design, I appreciate the consistency of color accents, which are available in orange, black, and silver, outlining the intake vents on both sides of the front panel, the outskirts of the side window, and on the inside. So all of the rubber pieces are also in bright orange, like the vibration pads on the fans, the hard drive rails, plus the rubber grommets around the motherboard. Even the power button is in character with an orange LED and white illumination for the other two colors. Speaking of the I/O, the reset switch is built into the hard drive activity LED, nice. Then we have 4 USB ports and centered audio jacks. The front panel is plastic and it's covered in this very popular brushed look. Looks very nice. It doesn't have to be cleaned as often as aluminum. It opens at 90 degrees and is covered with sound dampening material on the inside, and also can be swapped to be opened from the other side depending on the case orientation. There's a 3-speed 3-fan controller here, which is nicely accessible yet hidden, and a very clever dust filter that is removable from the top like so. Be Quiet, you gain some happy points from us, but the power supply dust filter covers almost the entire floor and can only be removed by sliding out towards the back, making it super inaccessible. Not cool. Coming back to the front panel though, it is incredibly difficult to remove, like seriously, they should do something about that, and just shows that recycling of frames without appropriate adjustment grants you outdated status. Here we have a 140mm fan that is included with support for dual 140s or 120mm fans. But check this out, you can only install fans outside of the frame, so radiators are completely out of the question here. And why is the case frame so restrictive when there's nothing on the interior? I really want Be Quiet to open up this area and allow users to install fans on the inside of the case for, radiators and such, as otherwise this is not water cooling friendly at all. The top of the frame is also just as difficult to remove. My god, it's just such a pain in the butt. And it's almost completely closed off too, aside from these ventilation strips and extra height on the panel to allow air to exit through the rear. Here the metal frame is a lot more open than the front and can support dual 120 or 140mm fans inside the frame. But look at where the ventilation strips align on the top panel, meaning you can only utilize the back slot to avoid choking the fans or avoiding airflow bouncing back into the case. I put a 140mm exhaust fan here, and luckily the venting strips do an okay job with letting the airflow exit, but the majority of it's actually directed through the higher portion of the plastic through the back, thus silencing the exhaust even further, so thumbs up. The takeaway here though is this case is not meant for any type of water cooling. You could install a 120mm all-in-one at the back, but I feel traditional CPU towers may be a better choice for airflow since the rear fan spacing is quite tight, despite the wide overall shape of the case. Now Be Quiet actually have done something interesting and unique with the side window that passed my nail scratch test, for anyone wondering. And many have this understanding that window panels don't totally fit in this silent category, but the polycarbonate in here has dual layers, making the window portion significantly thicker with an air gap in between the two plates, and we're told this helps to significantly reduce the noise when compared to just a single sheet of polycarbonate. The weird thing though is the metal panel itself isn't coated with any noise dampening material like the other side panel is, which I think would have been beneficial. I don't think there's a compromise in transparency factor, but the interior layer almost amplifies the reflection, making your hardware sort of less visible. The other side panel has noise dampening, but with a middle spacer plate that can house a fan and opened up to let this side breathe. I don't think you should install a fan here, but I do like the design element that it adds to an otherwise flat panel. Coming inside, I'm pretty happy with the color coordination of my orange CableMod cables, and the interior just looks awesome. Despite me using a reference GPU, this is the quietest system that I've ever built, thanks to the incredibly quiet case fans and the Darkrock 3 CPU cooler. Now, when it comes to interior modularity, it still needs vast improvements. You can reposition the hard drive cage into the top slot, which supports triple hard drives with this toolless anti-vibration mount and a single SSD on top of the drive cage, but I think I would rather prefer standard caddies to diversify my storage options, as the dual SSD brackets at the back just might not cut it. But my main disappointment is with that front portion of the frame that is both outdated and restrictive, and the same goes for the top that would not properly accommodate for a radiator because of lack of clearance. It is really meant to either remain fanless or just a single fan at the back for the top portion. For additional airflow, a fan can be installed on the floor since it is dustproof, but ironically, with Be Quiet's own power supply, it blocks both mounting positions, so you can't install a fan there with this power supply, but the case feet are quite tall to potentially allow fresh intake from there. Cable management at the back is workable, but disappointing. Workable because the gap is plenty wide to concentrate your cables around the perimeter of the case, but disappointing because there are simply not enough cable tie points around those key areas. They do include a single adhesive hook that I gladly utilized as a cable tie holder at the top here, but thinking there's a full year, actually more than a year, time difference between this and the bigger brother Silentbase 800, which suffered from the exact same limitations. So this is not okay. The frame is clearly outdated, despite me being really happy with the build here because it's so freaking quiet. So let's talk about that. Alright, so now comes the interesting part in testing out how quiet the Silentbase 600 really is. And subjectively, to me, this feels like the quietest system that I've ever built. I chose to go with an actual CPU heatsink to eliminate the extra noises that you generally get with all-in-one solutions. So like the pump noise is quite evident. So here, you get rid of that, having a single CPU heatsink, one fan for exhaust, and one more top fan for exhaust as well. So in total, 4 fans. The loudest component in the system is actually the GPU, which is surprising to me because I always considered 980 Ti is like super quiet in all my other builds. But in comparison to the rest of the system and how silent the fans are and the CPU heatsink is, it's actually quite incredible. So I actually had to hold my breath for the duration of that sound test because even my breathing was being picked up by the microphone because I turned up the gain sensitivity on this thing super high, so you get a clear idea on how loud the system is versus the ambient and versus the 3 different fan profiles. And for conclusion, I want to say the Silentbase 600 delivers perfectly well on what Be Quiet stands for, and with their own fans, their own CPU cooler, and their power supply, this is the quietest machine that I've ever built. But it's the assembly process itself that is the weakest point here. Totally non-user-friendly panels, it lacks any sort of potential for water cooling, and just not enough work on cable management that loses on so many competitive points despite being the quietest case in our review history. And that is all for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more similar content, and we'll see you in the next video.